Okay, we've now come to what you could call a different section in the Gospel of John. Up until now, it had been telling about Jesus' ministry. It had told about 3 years of Jesus' life in the first 11 chapters of the Gospel of John. Now, there's 21 chapters altogether, and so the next 10 chapters, starting in chapter 12 through chapter 21, it's going to tell about the last week of Jesus' life. It's going to tell about his death, his burial, and his resurrection, and the post-resurrection appearances. And so the gospel really slows down, and it gives some intense teaching by Jesus, particularly what goes on in the upper room. But first, we have this story about Jesus coming back to Bethany. That's where Mary and Martha and Lazarus lived. That's where Jesus had raised Lazarus from the dead. And Bethany was very close to Jerusalem. Remember, just 2 miles away. And in chapter 12, verse 1, it says this: 6 days before the Passover, Jesus arrived at Bethany, where Lazarus lived, whom Jesus had raised from the dead. Here a dinner was given in Jesus' honor. Martha served, while Lazarus was among those reclining at the table with him. Then Mary took about a pint of pure nard, an expensive perfume. She poured it on Jesus' feet and wiped his feet with her hair, and the house was filled with the fragrance of the perfume. 6 days before the Passover. And so Jesus has come to town. He's come to town early. He comes to Bethany, and Martha has prepared this dinner for him. And so it's not only him, it's also the apostles. And so this is one of the reasons that people seem to think that Mary and Martha and Lazarus probably had some money, some real means, because they were able to host Jesus, they were able to host his disciples, and they're all sitting around eating. It says that Martha was the one who was serving, and that seems to be what she does best. In one of the other stories that we have in the Gospels, Martha is serving while Mary is at the feet of Jesus, and here we have the same thing happening. So Martha's serving. They're all reclining at the table, and by reclining at the table, they're not sitting in chairs. They're sitting on the floor at a low table, and they're reclining there, probably lying on one arm, being propped up by their arm, and eating with the other hand. So as Martha served, Mary, her sister, it says, took about a pint of pure nard. A pint is about a half of a liter, 0.5 liters. And nard was a very expensive perfume, the Bible tells us. And it says that she poured it on Jesus' feet, and she wiped his feet with her hair. Think about that. Think how strong perfume is, and you just use a little bit of it at a time. It's very expensive, and she poured the whole thing out on Jesus' feet. And so the whole room is filled with the smell of this perfume. Verse 4 says, "But one of the disciples, Judas Iscariot, who was later to betray him, objected. Why wasn't this perfume sold and the money given to the poor? It was worth a year's wages." He did not say this because he cared about the poor, but because he was a thief. As keeper of the money bag, he used to help himself to what was put in it. John gives us here the best description of who Judas was. You don't get this from the other Gospels. John just tells us plainly Judas was a thief. He kept track of the money. He kept the money bag, and he used to steal money out of the money bag. And so Judas spoke up and said, man, what a waste this is. She poured out a whole pint of this very expensive perfume, half a liter, just on Jesus' feet. It's a real waste. This perfume could have been sold. It's worth a year's wages. A year's wages is a lot of money. I don't care what culture you're in or where you're living. You still have to be able to work a whole year and put everything that you made toward buying the perfume and not have anything else to live on. And so another reason to think that Mary, Martha, and Lazarus had some money is because they were able to afford this very expensive bottle of perfume. And Judas says it could have been sold, the money given to the poor. And John tells us, no, he wasn't concerned about the poor. He was just concerned about the money because he was a thief. And so Jesus' response to Judas is, leave her alone. It was intended that she should save this perfume for the day of my burial. You will always have the poor among you, but you will not always have me. So Jesus just tells Lazarus to shut up. Leave her alone. Quit criticizing her. She's doing a good thing. This was intended for my death, this perfume. I think, some teaching points that we can get out of this is, number one, we don't need to be the critic. If somebody is doing something for God, who are we to criticize what they're doing? Plus, it says that Jesus says this perfume was meant for my burial, but she's doing it now. I've often heard that we need to send flowers before people die instead of waiting until after they die to send flowers, which means we need to let people know we love them. We need to let people know how special they are to us while they're still living. Yes, she could have waited until Jesus' death, and she could have used his perfume to anoint his body then. But what good would it have done then? He wouldn't have been around to receive it. And so Jesus says, leave her alone. And he says, you always have the poor with you. And you can help those poor out anytime you want. But you won't always have me with you. Verse 9 goes on to say, meanwhile, a large crowd of Jews found out that Jesus was there and came, not only because of him, but also to see Lazarus, whom he had raised from the dead. So the chief priests made plans to kill Lazarus as well. For on account of him, many of the Jews were going over to Jesus and putting their faith in him. So the news got out that Jesus was in Bethany, and a large crowd came to Bethany, and they wanted to see Jesus. But they not only wanted to see Jesus, they wanted to see Lazarus. And so I can understand how that the Jewish leaders would want to kill Lazarus as well. Because if they killed him, he'd be dead again. And people wouldn't be able to point at him and say, see, this man was dead and now he's alive. Because he would be dead. And Jesus, they wanted to kill him because of what we've talked about before. They were afraid that he would lead an insurrection and bring the Romans down on them. Okay, we're going to stop here. Please write me, give me a sermon point and, 2 or 3 sentences defending that sermon point. Tell me what you'll say about it for these first 11 verses of chapter 12. Thanks.